So we got a Patreon listener question. This one comes from a longtime listener of the podcast, TheGreySkull. And TheGreySkull asks, you guys talk a lot about Gobots and how Hasbro owns the rights to that line. How did Hasbro end up owning the enemy? What he's referring to is that Gobots was a rival toy line to Transformers. Transformers was owned by, well, is still owned by Hasbro, and Gobots was owned by Tonka. Now, Tonka was mostly known as a die-cast construction kind of company where they would make a lot of, vehicles that for, die-cast and everything. But they figured, hey, let's get on this transforming robot bandwagon, import the Machine Robo toy line, along with a few other odds and ends that they would actually create for their IP. And, from Bandai that they got all of this. And then they released it over here as, Mighty Robots, Mighty Vehicles, Gobots. And, and then we had the Challenge of the Gobots cartoon by Hanna-Barbera. And the rest was history. Now, obviously, Tonka during the late 80s was going through a lot of financial problems. Video games were becoming huge with Nintendo, and then later Sega getting on the scene, and kids just weren't playing with die-cast toys anymore. And Tonka was having a lot of issues, and lo and behold, I believe it was 1991, if I remember correctly, Hasbro bought them out. Hasbro was like, hey guys, I know you guys are suffering heavily, and maybe we could do something. So pretty much Hasbro bought all of Tonka's subsidiaries, including Kenner, which was part of Tonka's little bubble.
Way. I didn't know Kenner was part of Tonka. Huh.
Yeah, and
there
that's how.
There's
that's
the connection.
That's how. Essentially, Kenner ended up in the wheelhouse with Hasbro in 1991, and pretty much Tonka was just like, okay, well, you also get the Gobots IP as a result. The problem is that the Gobots IP is a big mess in terms of, well, what do you get? In terms of, they get the names. They get the names of all the characters that were used in the past. They get the name of Gobots, all of that. They're able to use, to a degree, a lot of the names of the characters and the ideas that were used in the cartoon. Even the cartoon itself is kind of a sketchy area because the cartoon is currently owned by Warner Brothers. Because they own Hanna-Barbera right now, Warner Brothers. And so Warner Brothers is actually the ones responsible for putting out the DVDs and stuff. And we learned through the DVD releases that Hasbro's like, yes, we own now, all of our properties. So we could put out DVDs of all our Transformer series through Shout Factory. And then they said except Transformers Robots in the Skies. Currently Haim Saban still has that. And he's being kind of stubborn with that. So don't expect the Robots in Disguise DVD for for the American region anytime soon. There is one apparently for what's the UK? I think that's Region 2. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's Region 2. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think so.
Or are we Region 2? I'm not sure.
No, we're Region 1 because we're the same as Japan.
All right, cool.
NTSC and Japan's equivalent naming convention is usually 1, I think.
So essentially, there's
for DVDs or for Blu-rays?
DVD. Well, this is DVD in this case.
Oh, okay. It might be a little bit different.
So essentially,
for DVDs, it's different.
So at least with Robots in the Skies, I know the UK have a box set that somehow they're able to get around Haim Saban's jurisdiction. But we learned through that Hasbro's like, yeah, but we can't release the GoBot TV series because Warner Brothers owns that because they own Hanna-Barbera. So there's that whole thing too where it's like Hasbro can't really use footage from the series, but they could use the names of the characters that appeared in the series, but can they use the designs that were used in the series? Okay, we can't use the designs of the 100% designs of the Bandai characters, but okay, Leader 1 was slightly retooled from the Eagle Robo jet from Machine Robo, which would become Leader 1. It became really complicated. And they're just like, well, what did we get ultimately in the end? And in the end, they pretty much settled with, you know what, just to play it safe, we're just going to use names and nothing else. And in 1993, they, like, the first time they really dipped their their toe in the water was there was a G2 character named Gobots. And that was literally his name. His name was Gobots. And that he was like an orange car. And that came out, and then a couple of years later, they did the Gobots line itself, which was a whole bunch of spy changers for Generation 2, which were, the simple transforming one that would go on to be the spy changers that we know today. And I mean, and then you go through the whole history of them throwing around Gobot names. Leader One was used in Armada, and they were going to call even Unicron's little planet that he comes with, they were going to call it Gobotron at one point. And then they said to themselves, we're gonna register the name Gobotron to not only use it once, whatever. And they used Dead End in the end, which was one of the Stunticon characters. And so, and it would go on like that for a while. And so, like, it has a very weird history of how they ended up with the license and what they've been doing with it today. Because there's been even Japan did a box set in 2004 with eHobby, where it was supposed to have like all these mini bots repainted as the Gobot characters, and then at the 11th hour, they in the end they ended up not being able to call it Gobots because were because on the Japanese side they're like, maybe Bandai's going to give us hell, they were worried about that because they're it's one thing to do it in America and everything, but in Japan they were kind of like, ugh. So a lot of the color schemes kind of had to be changed on a lot of the characters so they didn't look 100% like their Gobot counterparts. And it's just ultimately, and we ended up with what we have is that Gobot box set today with, Bad Boy, Bug Bite, Pathfinder, Road Ranger, Smallfoot, and Shreds, I believe, was in there. So, and then again, you go down, like, there was Deadlift from the movie line, which looked like spoons,
Yeah.
Every so often, once in a while, Hasbro throws out a Gobot reference. And they'll put a little MR somewhere on the body, just to like really, cement it home. I know that there was, in 2007, there was Fracture, which was a repaint of the Classics Mirage to look like Crasher. They do here and there, this and that. But I mean, and we've talked about on the podcast now with Tom Spicoli, where he's going to be doing the Gobots comic. Mm-hmm. And that raises a whole bunch of other questions because the comic is using a lot of designs that seem like they pull from the Gobots Hanna-Barbera cartoon. So it's starting to raise questions now. What is usable? What isn't usable? Is this legal? Is that legal? Is this something that Hanna-Barbera is okay with? Because even though it's done through IDW, doesn't necessarily mean because it's IDW, so it's got to be Hasbro related. No, that's not really correct. Because IDW has done a lot of other properties that aren't related to Hasbro. A good example being the Ghostbusters property or X-Files. Like there's a lot of other properties that they do that aren't Hasbro-owned properties. So maybe there's a possibility because the way we're looking at it, and maybe the TheGreySkull's looking at it like this too, is we're going like, the IDW ongoing G1 continuity is ending, and now this Gobots comic is coming around. Maybe it's all interconnected. Maybe it's not.
God.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. So
what?
I mean,
That'd be insane.
It would be. I would like to see more Gobots in the Transformers universe, but I mean, as it stands right now, we don't know anything. But it says a lot about how, again, maybe Warner Brothers really is just not letting. It's either Warner Brothers or Bandai is really, not letting Hasbro use what they could be using from that, acquisition from Tonka all those years ago. I mean, look, we have that Machine Robo line from Action Toys.
Yeah.
That is out right now.
That we thought was dead.
That we thought was dead. That's still kicking. It's out right now.
And they put out some new stuff, no?
And that line's out there pretty much, challenging, in a lot of ways, like preventing Hasbro from like ever getting around to using those designs, saying like, hey, we're still alive. This line is still alive. These characters are not forgotten, and we're going to keep making money from this. So if you guys ever try to use those characters, even in a visual form, in any of your comic book media, this is something that we have on shelves right now that we could use as an argument going like, hey, we own these. We're making money from these even currently right now. So it's really confusing. Like it's a long, complicated history, but essentially it was Tonka making deals in the 80s. And I mean, it's the same thing. Like, look, you go back through Transformers' history and you look how, Hasbro at one point owned the rights to the Macross Valkyrie. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Which was a Bandai kind of owned thing, where today it's not the case. They would never be able to release that toy as a Transformer today. Like, imagine a G1 reissue Jetfire. Would not happen today. It's impossible. They wouldn't be able to do it because it's the Valkyrie from Bandai. But back then they didn't think like that. They didn't think of the long-term history, and it's the same thing. Bandai back then, or in this case Poppy, which was the main dudes behind Gobots and Machine Robo with Bandai.
Yeah.
They weren't really they weren't thinking, Tonka's going to use these toys and then that'll be that. They didn't think like, Tonka's going to sell the rights to Hasbro, which is Takara in Japan, one of our rival companies. It's a long, messy history. And ultimately, in the end, I mean, what's going to come in the future? Well, we'll definitely see what happens with Tom Spicoli's comic.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure at some point they'll bring up like, okay, here's the legal behind it. Like this is a Warner Brothers thing, or this is, Warner Brothers allows us to use the designs, or maybe Hasbro ultimately in the end worked something out where they could do this kind of stuff. And if that's the case, maybe it might open the doors to what they could do from a toy perspective if ever they want to. Yeah. I mean, not to mention Tom Spicoli, when he did his G.I. Joe versus Transformers comic book, they had a whole bunch of merchandising from Kid Robot that was being done.
So they just kind of tied it all together, basically.
Well, Kid Robot could do anything they want. They're not Hasbro owned. So if Warner Brothers does own the Gobot stuff, they could still make toys through Kid Robot. Because Kid Robot has done Ninja Turtles, they've done G.I. Joe, they've done Power Rangers, so it's all over that's Bandai right there, in a lot of ways. So they could do whatever the heck they want. So if we do expect to get any kind of modern day Gobot toys, they might not be transformable because it's Kid Robot, despite the name, unfortunately. We might get at least some kind of non-transformable, semi-posable figures through Kid Robot of Leader 1 and Psykill. And from what we've seen from Tom Spicoli's little teases, Turbo looks like he's in it too. Just follow Tom Spicoli on Twitter. He's been posting a lot of stuff that's making my mouth water right now. So I can't wait till those books come out. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, GreySkull. Like it's a messy history. It's a lot of legal. It's the same headaches that Hasbro went through when dealing with Robotech and what was going on with the Robotech licensing with Macross. It's the same headaches that Hasbro was going through for years trying to be able to do Shockwave properly before, actually making a proper toy. Like there's so many loopholes. Same thing with Whirl and Roadbuster, all the history behind those characters. There's certain toys from certain brands that just will never see true reiterations. Anyone who's a Shogun Warriors fan,
my goodness,
Shogun Warriors is probably the messiest of all the robot brands in America. It's like, hey, let's take all these different brands and slam them into one continuity and make a Marvel comic out of it. And there you have Godzilla, Deimos, Mazinger Z, Raiden.
I think back in the day they weren't thinking about long term.
Oh, they weren't.
Like, just slam all these Japanese toys together, or whatever.
And Shogun Warriors, it's the same thing. It's something that even predates G1. They really weren't thinking even as early in the super early 80s, late 70s. So it's messy. It's a lot of that messy stuff. And today, even to this day, look at the whole story with and here's another related to Transformers on Rom the Space Knight. Rom the Space Knight was another thing too, where the creator pretty much had to die in order for the rights to really get freed up and stuff in a lot of different ways. So like it was kind of messy. That's always a
depressing thing when you're just like, come on, like just go already so we can get all these toys again, or just actually do something with these licenses,
Yeah, well, and you know what? It's right. The creators have the right, but at the same time, if they're kind of sitting on it, and fans are just urging for something, then sometimes I understand money is you're entitled to your money. you know. But at the same time, like, you know, sometimes the fans, you know, like, do you even care about them? These are people that love your creation, and to sit on it forever, you know, like that's the complicatedness with Saban. It's the complicatedness that happened from Harmony Gold when it comes to Robotech and their stubbornness with Robotech as it pertains to Macross and later how it affected Transformers.
Right.
You know, it's this, and again, look at, you know, what happened with what's happening with Gobots right now. I mean, it's always been messy. There's been a back and forth history between Hasbro and specifically Bandai, even Bandai of America, where, I mean, I think I've mentioned the story in a panel at TFCon, but when the Universe 1.0 toy line was out in the early 2000s, they were worried because at the time Bandai had a line called Machine Robo Rescue, which was, it wasn't like I would say it's a revival of Machine Robo, but it was a different take on the Machine Robo designs. It was more of a Sentai-ish kid series. And so that line was out in Japan, and Hasbro was like, what if they try to bring this line over to be like a counter to Transformers? Because it was an anime series, it was the early 2000s, so they thought, you know, this might be a rival for us. So they right away went and they took the Universe 2.0, the Universe 1.0 line, and they registered a name, Machine Robot Rescue, and then they slapped it on two of their toys. If you buy Inferno, Universe 1.0 Deluxe Inferno or Universe 1.0 Deluxe Ratchet, which are repaints of the car robot toys, Mach Alert and Wild Ride, aka X-Brawn and Prowl. If you buy those, look under their names on the card back. It says Machine Robot Rescue, trademarked. and they did that to pretty much, in a lot of ways, you know, for lack of better words, to cockblock Bandai of America from bringing that line over and using that title, because they knew Bandai of America can't use Gobots. They own that, but they also wanted to make sure they couldn't use Machine Robo. You know, again, messy history, very, very messy history. I'm pretty sure at the same time, it's like, you know, especially the way Hasbro is now, where they do own a lot of properties today, it's still probably pretty messy. You know, like you were talking, Wendell was on another podcast, the Franklin Armstrong Collective, and you guys were talking about the Mattel universe.
Oh, yeah.
The Mattel movie universe, which is going on right now. So, you know, like, trust me.
Which is now a thing. And it's like, where have you been?
Yeah, it's
it's weird because one thing I was mentioning, and we were mentioning also, was the fact that, well, haven't Mattel been kind of doing this stuff already? Like, they have all those Barbie movies underneath their belt.
Oh yeah,
like straight to DVD movies. They have they've been saying that, we're gonna be working on a He-Man movie.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned when you were on the show Max Steel, when they did that, for lack of better words, abortion of a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that really hit the fan. And I remember when they released that, I was like, oh boy, like, I don't know if that's going to leave a bad taste in their mouth. So who knows where that's going to go. But anyways, we're getting a little off topic talking about Mattel and their... No, it's not. It's my fault for even bringing it up. But anyways, I hope that answers your question, GreySkull. Gobots has a weird history, and I mean, we're going to definitely learn more with Tom Spicoli's book, and we're going to see what could be done and what can't be done from a legal standpoint. And we'll probably have an update on this question in a lot of ways in future segments when those comics come out, because I know I will definitely be talking about them. Worst case, just follow my Twitter and you'll see the gushing there.